With kids that works. Don't just do it.
Good morning. How are you?
Check one. Hey. Okay. Are we live?
I hope you are.
I didn't ask if we are alive. Are we live right now? If not, this would be a very awkward conversation. Well, good morning, class. I've received multiple thumbs up from the booth, so I guess we're going. Yeah. Well, welcome back to our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. I know it's a book that you have all been just dying to study. You've gone your whole life saying, I sure wish somebody would teach me about Ecclesiastes. Well, we heard your requests, and here we are. No, it's a cool book, and it's often overlooked. And today we will read probably the most memorable and famous section out of the book because of the band and the Turtles. The Turtles. Was this late 60s or early 70s? Late 60s.
During the Jesus Revolution.
During the Jesus Revolution. There you go. How about that? So yeah, the Turtles, not of Mutant Ninja fame, but rather the 60s sort of folky band, popularized the song, Turn, Turn, Turn. And that's the part that everybody knows. And that's the part that's not in the Bible. But we're gonna read through this section today, and I think we've got a good shot at just doing the whole chapter today. We'll see. I have notes pretty much through the end of the chapter, so we'll go. And if we go to chapter 4, then we'll just make it up as we go along. He likes it. All right. So Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I'd like to tell you what page number, but depending on what sort of Bible you have, all the pages are different. So you got to find it on your own. Let's get our context, and then we'll dive in. Who is the probable author of the book of Ecclesiastes? Solomon. Very good. I read your lips. And we think this is probably early in his life or late in his life? Late in his life. Somebody give me a couple notable facts about Solomon. He was wise. It might be, and this is looking ahead a little bit, into chapter 4, I think. It might be that if you asked Solomon, he would say he was wiser at the beginning than at the end, which is fascinating. It makes sense, actually, if you read through the story of his life. He started at his most humble and most righteous, and as he became rich and famous and powerful, the thing that happened to lots of people when they become rich and famous and powerful happened to him, right? Which is he lost his mind. Well, maybe that's stating it too crassly. He became absorbed in all the things he had gained, and in the process had lost his humility, and in the process had lost his righteousness and his desire for God's heart. So we get Solomon toward the end of his life looking back on and reflecting on it all, having reached the top. And when you're at the top, there's nowhere to go but down, right? And that's sort of where he's at in life. He's like, I've got it all. I've got all the wisdom, and that didn't really fulfill me. And I got all the riches. That didn't fulfill me. I sought all the pleasures, both the sort of immediate ones of sort of carnal desire, if you will, and maybe the more philanthropic ones and the more long term, right? Building the gardens, digging the pools to feed the garden, all that kind of stuff. I did all that. I did it all. I followed the manual for what you're supposed to do when you're rich and famous, and I still feel empty inside. And I'm starting to realize that everything I've done in all of these areas of my life amount to nothing. Particularly because as he's approaching the end of his life, he's approaching the end of his life. And he doesn't get to keep the riches, and he doesn't get to keep the gardens, and he doesn't get to experience all the pleasures anymore. And he says, the rich man and the fool basically wind up the same, right? Because in the end, the same fate awaits them both. And then he was lamenting a little bit that he's going to have to turn over his kingdom one day. As David turned over the kingdom to Solomon, so one day Solomon's going to have to turn over the kingdom to somebody else. And maybe David could rest a bit securely in handing it over to Solomon because Solomon did so well with it. But what is Solomon's number one claim to fame? He is the wisest man. Which means that his son will at least not be as wise as he is. He's not even sure who he's going to hand the kingdom over to. And he's having sort of like a crisis, right? Not a midlife crisis, like a late in life crisis. I've done it all, and I'm about to lose it all. So, toward the end of last chapter, he said, well, what's the point of working hard? You struggle, and in the end of the day, you don't get to keep it. Verse 24. So after the sorrow and vexation of life, and Solomon's starting to have maybe a little bit of an epiphany, he says, verse 24, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or have any enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given the business of knowledge, of wisdom, has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after the wind. So, toward the end of his life, I think Solomon, I think we could paraphrase it this way, and if I've gone awry, I want you to speak up. It's okay. I'm open to dialoguing. But I think he could paraphrase it something like this. I've discovered at the end of my life, it's not so much what you do. It's about your perspective on life in general. You won't find fulfillment by doing great things. You will only find fulfillment in receiving each day and every opportunity and everything that you have as a gift from God. And when it's a gift, you receive it with gratitude, and then you find enjoyment. Does that make sense? You think I've paraphrased him properly? I know I've sermonized properly, but right, this is what he's saying. So, chapter 3, we're going to go ahead and start in. After probably one of my shortest summaries ever. 10 minutes in, we're ready to go.
But we're only 2 books into the Bible.
Yeah, we're only 2 chapters in. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. In all fairness, I don't know if we're going to go verse by verse through the whole book. Once we get through this opening section, because a lot of it tends to be deeper dives into the same ideas. And the whole book is great. It's in your Bible, you should read it. But I might, when we get a little bit later on in the study, kind of pick some sections and we'll just go through them. And I'll leave you on your own to read the whole thing. And then when you see Solomon in heaven, he'll be like, did you? Did you read the whole thing? Pastor friend of mine, Delton Weiser, many of y'all know him. I heard him preach on Habakkuk once, and he said, one day you're going to get to heaven, and you might meet Habakkuk, and he might ask you, did you read my book? So at least I think you should read all the ones with the names on them, so it's not awkward when you get to heaven, right?
But is Malachi a person, or we'll have to talk about it.
Yeah. At least you didn't call him Malachi. I've heard that before. All right. Chapter 3, verse 1. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. You've probably heard this passage before, and I have the opportunity to read it publicly with some regularity. Where do you suppose I get to read this with some regularity? Oftentimes at funerals, right? Why is that? Why would this be something that people find meaningful or appropriate for funerals?
Everything is in God's time when we're born.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's pretty explicit. There's a time to be born and a time to die, and a time to weep and laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. And so, that speaks to the very moment you're in. So what's the message you're given by reading this? I think it's different, when you do the funeral of the 112-year-old, person who's been struggling with their health for decades, and then when you do the funeral of somebody who's maybe in their 50s or 60s or 30s or teens. People are going through different things in those situations, Death after, let's say, a traumatic car accident is very different than somebody who had a chronic illness for years. They're also the same, right? Ultimately, it's the same message, which is we have a Christ who has triumphed over death. By faith, your loved one is with him. By faith, one day, we will be with him as well. Never have to say goodbye. But the character and quality of the grief people are experiencing is often different. For those sudden and unexpected or untimely deaths, what we would call untimely, that's actually probably not a really good phrase, come to think of it, but those unexpected deaths, oftentimes you're dealing with shock and grief of a different quality than somebody who has been slowly fading away. In those cases, often what happens is many family members get to start grieving before it even happens. And they get to say goodbyes that maybe you didn't get to in another circumstance. And when you hear things like, I can't believe this happened, he was so young, or he seemed so healthy, or it just seemed too soon. A passage like this can be helpful because it does remind you that it may feel too soon to us, but everything happens in its appointed season, right? And maybe for reasons we don't understand. And I can't promise that I can explain it to you, but maybe for reasons we don't understand, this is the right time. God has a perspective on things that we don't. Another thing I like about this passage is, and I also read from 2 Thessalonians at just about every funeral I do, where he talks about we grieve with hope. The reason why is, as Christians, we know that somebody who dies in Christ lives with Christ. And it's a reason to celebrate, right? Sometimes I think we can get a little bit too zealous about that idea and give ourselves a hard time when we say things like, I know I really should be joyful right now. Okay, you could be comforted with that joy, but it's also okay. God gives you permission. It's healthy and appropriate to mourn. We just don't have an open-ended mourning and an open-ended sorrow that's just like, well, I guess it's just a tragedy we'll never understand. No. That's not the character of our mourning. The Christian funeral is not a place for everybody to say their goodbyes. It's a place for people to say, see you later. And that's still hard, right? You're going to miss them at Christmas. You're going to miss them around the anniversary. You're going to miss them, But there's a hopefulness to it that eases the pain and that allows us some measure of comfort and joy. I think that's one of the big reasons that this passage gets read in funerals quite a bit. But is it appropriate for other times? Well, when I read this, it seems to address kind of every moment of life, not just the end. I'm a dad of a elementary age kid, and so when I read a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, what goes instantly in my brain is going into his bedroom for bedtime. It's like, yes, we got all of the toys out. That was appropriate. But we also have a time to put the toys back away. That would be good too. And yes, I want to give you a hug at the end of the night. No, you have to let go because you do have to go to bed. And I know that you're stalling, however sweet it may be. Right? One of the things that I think is really important about this passage, though, and it's implicit. It's not said explicitly, it's implicit, but I think it is really valuable, is that if there is a season for everything, if there's a time for everything, what you want to do is you want to learn to recognize what season you're in. Is this the time to embrace? Is this the time to let go? Is this the time to scatter the stones? Or is this the time to bring them together? Is this, and here's one of the places that I think the rubber really hits the road, is this the time to hold my tongue? Or is this the time to speak up? And there's a place for both of those. Amen? Amen. You correctly gauged this was the time to speak up. Some of y'all missed it. All right? But I mean this seriously. Let's keep it at a fairly light level. We can go deeper. We can keep it at a fairly light level. You're at a store or at a restaurant, and the service you're receiving is less than stellar. You have a decision, right? Do I go complain, or do I let it go? Which is the right answer?
Decrease your tip.
Well, that would be hold your tongue, right? That is part of the thing. That is a choice that we made recently, right? We held our tongue, but we decreased the tip. Well, neither one is always the right answer, and that's the point here, right? I'm starting to think more and more that I can shoulder offenses to myself, and that's not That's no great loss. That's fine. But sometimes speaking up helps the next guy. And oftentimes that's going to be the tipping point for me as to whether I keep silent or speak up. You know? Because I can put up with a lot. But sometimes me putting up with a lot makes things worse for the person behind me.
Or it can help the person you're speaking to at the moment.
Or it could.
They might not realize they're, dwelling on what happened during the day, and they needed to put that away and go to work and put a smile on their face.
For sure. And knowing why you're speaking up really helps you shape the message. Right? So these are things that, as I'm becoming a little bit more mature, I'm starting to think through. It's like, well, do I just let this ruin my day? Do I shrug it off and not let it ruin my day? Do I take that person aside gently and tell them? Do I go above their head to the manager? Well, it all depends. And this is a pretty low level example. You could take this up higher levels, right? Maybe you see things moving in society, in the world around us. And you have to decide, is this a place to speak up, or is this a place to keep silent? Who gets helped if I speak up? Who gets hurt? What does it do to my Christian witness if I speak up? Maybe it's exactly what Jesus is calling me to. Or maybe Jesus is calling me to bear my hardships with loving compassion and kindness. And this is just one example, but I think it's a solid one of the importance of learning to recognize what season it is. A time to tear and a time to sow. I'm not as just a bog standard garden variety LCMS ordained pastor. I don't have a lot of training in counseling. I have a little bit. And I feel as if I'm in the right spot if I'm counseling somebody from a spiritual perspective. But I would not replace a therapist, right? Or a psychologist or any of that. That's not my role. So with that in mind, I think a wise counselor will help you sift through, let's say, relationships. Is this a relationship worth mending? Or is this a relationship that needs a clean break? From your pastor's standpoint, if there's outstanding sin, that needs to be forgiven. But that doesn't mean that you re-engage in the relationship in the same way. Sometimes Paul goes this way, and Barnabas goes that way. It's okay. They still love each other, but just they're parting ways.
Can I say something?
Please.
I think this is going back just a little bit, but when you're trying to decide whether to say something or not say something, it's important to check your heart. Why are you wanting to say something?
Yeah.
Is it because I've been offended and I deserve better, or is it because you're trying to help that person?
Right. Yeah. If you couldn't hear, what Carol said is when you're trying to make the decision whether you speak up or not, good question is to look at your heart and think about why you want to speak up. And when you do this, it can be really easy to lie to yourself too. And to give yourself pious motivations that you don't really have. So I would say just, be careful, be honest with yourself. But that's exactly a great test before you speak up. Part of the narrative here is the idea that all good things come to an end. It's not spring all the time. Things won't grow forever. All good things come to an end. Right? Well, what are we doing
In this
here?
world.
That's it. See, that's it. And it's helpful to recognize that so much of Solomon's struggle through this book is that he has concerned himself with all things under the sun, which is a phrase he uses quite a bit. But are there good things that don't come to an end? Heaven? All you can eat shrimp? No. Yeah, heaven. God. His mercy and love. There actually are good things that don't come to an end. And I think that the reason that we feel such disappointment when good things do come to an end is that we're kind of hardwired to expect them not to, which we will get to here in a little bit. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. There are a few things on this list that I don't like reading and that I personally wrestle with. Are there a few things on the list of a time force that kind of rub you the wrong way? War. Okay, good. What else? Hate. Good. Anything else? Killing. That was my short list. I don't know, maybe you've got something else, but that was a list of things that popped out to me, and I was like, really? There's a time to kill? There's a time to hate? There's a time for war? Maybe let's take those one at a time. Is there a time to kill?
Food, maybe?
For food, maybe? Okay. Yeah. Now, of course, in the Garden of Eden, they didn't. It's actually after the flood that that God says, you know what? You can go ahead and eat animals now. But what about people? I think when we read that, that's the first thing that comes to mind, and hopefully that's not what you meant. So what about people? Is there a time to kill people?
Not for me to kill, but sometimes the government. Capital punishment.
Sometimes the government, yeah. Defense. Yeah, so this is one of those things that's a sad truth, that in God's perfect world, no. But that's not the world that we live in currently. And there is a righteous time when you defend the lives of some by taking the lives of others. That happens. It happened in the Bible. It's one of those places where, again, it's sort of like the do I talk to the manager situation. Like, well, the Christ-like example is that I would rather die innocently than harm another person. Well, that's a great ideal if it's just the two of y'all. If somebody breaks into my house, well, now I'm not just thinking about my life, I'm thinking about my family. And maybe the righteous thing isn't to just passively lay down my life, but maybe it's to defend the lives of others. It's regrettable, but sometimes the police need to do this, right? You said capital punishment. And there are some people who are ardently against it, and I'm not going to debate, because there are some good arguments about being against it, right? The shortest one being, well, sometimes you get it wrong. Okay. I mean, yes, I gotcha. What's that?
It happened to Jesus.
It happened to Jesus, yeah. Nevertheless, the point there is protecting and the flourishing of society. And it dovetails right into war. is there ever a time for war? You know, a lot of us wish it wasn't so.
Well, I mean, Jericho, I mean, there's God-sanctioned wars happening all the time.
Well, that's it. And you know, especially for us in the post-Jesus era, where what we've seen from Jesus is this, Jesus never committed an act of violence greater than maybe flipping over tables and driving livestock out of the market with a whip, right? So we might think that there's no place for war among Christians. But I don't think that's exactly what he's saying here, right? I mean, like, what Gabriel, the angel of God, that means warrior of God, right? We read about the wars that God does. Where things get really muddy for us is you are not called to take up arms in the name of Jesus. That's not how it works. There is a place in the civil realm where, you know, if there's an aggressor who wants to conquer your lands, maybe you need to join up with the army. There are evil regimes that need to be opposed. And there's some obvious examples. We could point at World War II, you know, and sometimes it's less obvious than that. And I'm not here to tell you which war is the right one and which one is the wrong one. That'd be a whole different conversation. But the point here is, you know, sometimes you do have to take up arms to defend the innocent. So, war and killing, regrettably. What about hate? A time to hate? That seems like there's really no place for that in the Christian heart. Okay?
We don't hate people, but sometimes we hate their sinful behavior.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways that we can resolve this. Number one, it might be that when we say hate, we might be just a little bit too specific and a little bit too universal in how we're thinking about the word hate, right? So let's go back to that idea that there is a war that is worth fighting. It is difficult to do the proper job of war if you look at the man on the other side of the battlefield as your brother. So that could be part of what's being considered here. Again, I'm trying to disambiguate the idea of a one-for-one, the way that we think of the word hate, which is very specific in our own language and time, and probably how it's being used here. But a way that I think it's easier for us to resolve this is just to say, you know what, maybe it's not about hating people at all, but there are things worth hating. Sin is worth hating, right? Sometimes the spirit of a time that is destroying people is worth hating. Yeah, that's probably enough on that if we're going to move. So let's keep going. Oh, well, any questions before we move on from that? I don't want to just close the book without giving you guys a chance.
You know, one thing that this brought to my mind was, you know, when people are going through the dark part of it, right? So a time to mourn, right? It's okay to let people do that, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, this idea of, well, you should do that. You should be happy. You should be celebrating that they're in heaven now, for
Right.
example, with the loss of a loved one. But this suggests, no, it's okay to mourn.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we just did a funeral last week. Boy, the days are all running together. Last week. Well, if today's the first day of the week, then it was the week before. Like 10 days ago, something like that. And And as often happens, there's a mixture of laughter and weeping. You know? And I think that's okay too. And I don't think we have to just look at big seasons and say, well, for the next 6 months, you are mourning and that's exactly what you're doing. Well, yeah, but I mean, even in those times, there's joy. Even in those times, God and your brothers and sisters might help lift that load a little bit. All right, verse 9. Chapter 3, verse 9. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of men to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Yeah. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. What does that mean? God has put eternity in man's heart, yet so that he cannot discover what God has done from the beginning to the end. What does that mean? Do you think there's eternity in your heart?
This makes me think about these people that declare that they're not Christian, that they don't believe in the Bible, will often, say things like, if the universe wants good things for you. And I always think to myself, well, just replace the word universe with God.
Yeah.
We're always striving for this bigger thing.
Yeah.
Even if we reject, the people that reject this are still searching.
Yeah.
It doesn't just go away.
Right. Yeah. You kind of can't escape it. You got to be darn stubborn to be strictly materialistic, right? You got to be really stubborn. And the people who are often wind up in a camp of believing there is no such thing as free will, right? Because everything is just chemicals in your brain and all that was determined by evolution, and you go back on down, which at the end of the day, if that's really what you believe, then you have nothing but nihilism, right? Because nothing matters. But a lot of people who want to hold on to that thought, they want to keep nihilism at bay. So then they'll start acting as though they have free will. No, we're not made to be strictly materialist, like to just think that the atoms of the universe is all that exists. The word I like to use is transcendence, right? The idea that things go beyond. Man, everybody has a longing for transcendence. And a lot of people who don't know or kind of refuse to believe in God, they seek that transcendence in a number of ways. Through meditation, through chemical improvement of their brains, through maybe creating an enduring legacy, being part of something bigger than themselves, right? But there's always something bigger. You all hear me sometimes talk about the importance of awe, going to the beach and just seeing the vastness of the ocean, or casting your eyes up to the top of a mountain, or maybe climbing that mountain, I don't know. Just getting a sense of looking up at the, getting out away from the city lights a little bit, which you got to go farther and farther for these days, and looking up at the night sky and just taking it in and thinking about the light from those stars left this star hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, I don't know. Because it takes a long time for that light to get to you. And just really taking in the scale of it all. And you feel small. In a good way. We all have that hunger for transcendence. And we all have that deep-rooted belief of its existence. But here's the thing. I will tell you, I will confess my faith in a God who is immortal, who is infinite, who is omnipotent, right? Who is ubiquitous. That means he's everywhere. Okay? I believe those things about God. Do I understand those things about God? No. Which is why you get questions like, well, can God make a rock? If God can do anything, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it? I've heard a dumber version. Would you like it?
Yeah.
Can God microwave a burrito so hot that he can't eat it? What? The fact that we ask those kind of questions are proof that despite the fact that we might believe these things about God, we don't understand them about God. He has put, I'm going to reread that again. He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. Like the works of God, despite the fact that we live in them, are at some level incomprehensible. For Thanksgiving, I know not all of y'all were here for Thanksgiving Eve. You missed out if you did. But we talked about God making everything from nothing. Nobody can do that but God. In a real way, you might say that nobody is truly creative. We are synthesizers. We take what's there, maybe we can recombine it into a new way, boom, right? You put the ingredients in your pumpkin pie, right? Blending all those flavors together beautifully. But who made the flavor of the pumpkin? And the nutmeg. I'm grasping for what the ingredients in a pumpkin pie are. Yeah. Who designed the taste of cream? You know, like only God can make from nothing. And that breaks all the rules that we know. So I think this is cool, and I think it's useful to understand. And when you make peace with that paradox, then actually it's a really great place to live in because you can let go. You can say, God is infinite, and I don't fully grasp that. And if somebody pushes me and tries to put me on the spot, I can simply say, that's what supernatural is, man. I'm not going to tell you naturally how he does it. He doesn't follow the rules. He breaks the rules because he's supernatural. All right. As I perceived, there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to men. Eat, drink, and be merry, right? You get no pleasure out of it if it's the end unto itself. And this is why I love Thanksgiving. It's not just about the food. It's partially about the food. But it's about that moment where you take and you go, all this that we enjoy is from God. And it makes the turkey a little bit more moist. And it makes the mashed potatoes a little bit creamier. You know what I mean? To just receive it as a gift. And we could probably do that with every meal. We should. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. Now that is the physics theory? No, I think it's a law at this point. The law of conservation of mass and energy, right? Mass and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. You could shift them back and forth, but you can't change the net sum of it all. Solomon had that worked out thousands of years ago, right? In his own way. This idea that whatever God does is eternal and whatever you do is ephemeral. You're going to raise up a great kingdom? It's not going to last. You're going to build a palace? It's not going to stand forever. You're going to eat a great meal? you'll be hungry again. But whatever God does stands forever. And you can't add to that, and you can't take away from that. And as a Christian, you're like, but I would like to add to what God is doing. No, that's not what God's asking you to do. He's asking you to be part of what he's doing. And he'll do it with or without you. But he'd rather do it with you. Because that's better for you.
I've got a thought. So, I read this recently, that every molecule of water on this planet has been here since the creation of time.
Okay.
And it gives me this thought that nothing can be added and nothing can be taken away. And that can be said for everything here. You know, the total number of carbon and hydrogen atoms on this planet today, unless a meteor hits us, of course, but it's all the same. Nothing can be added or taken away.
Yeah.
And so how we use it and what we use it for is the question, right? And is that, are we doing that in a way that exemplifies God, or are we doing it in a way that pleases ourselves?
Absolutely. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Okay. So, yeah, there's no new thing under the sun. Got it. Whatever has been, whatever is, already has been. We talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago. You know, we're not necessarily saying that some ancient culture had 5G, you know, and iPhones exactly, but you're probably looking too narrowly if that's how you're thinking about things. But also, who knows? I mean, who really knows? We are discovering things all the time. And let me tell you, anytime you hear an archaeologist say that they've discovered a site that was probably used for ceremonial purposes, what they're saying is, we don't know what this is. We assume they did a ceremony here. Okay. Was this a Neolithic cell tower? Maybe. I don't know. Right? We don't know what they had. And there's some weird stuff when you read your Bible about the ancient world that we kind of go, I don't know. What's Leviathan? What's Behemoth? Like, what are these things? So, what has been will be. But here's the bit I wanted to touch on, and we probably need to wrap with this. I didn't get to the end of the chapter, but I think we still had fun today. He said, that which is already has been, that which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. I think that's fascinating. And I'm not even sure what he means by that exactly. I know what I hear when I read it. You know, the image that comes to my mind is the Good Shepherd. But what does he mean? I think he means, at least in some portion, that nothing will ever really be lost to time, right? We might not remember it, but God does. He's going to maintain things in his own way. The world moving through this cycle, ongoing, no matter how hard you try and push the brakes against the wheel, it will not slow down, right? That's okay. We can give that over to God and just say, well, what are you calling us to do? All right, we'll wrap up there. Thanks. I don't know about the status of Bible class next week. I think we're probably meeting. If we're not, I'll make sure that gets out to you guys this week. But next week is our children's program, so if they have needs of the space or whatever, I want to be accommodating. So let's plan on it, yes, but if not, we'll make sure that gets out to you guys. And then I don't think we're going to have it on the 24th. I think we will not do a Bible study on the 24th. I'm just decreeing that right now.
Yeah.
We're going to go easy on ourselves. We're going to practice a lot of extra music, and you guys are going to come as merry as you can be. Thank you all so much. We'll pick it up there later on.